Living in the light. The phrase living in the light usually refers to us living in the light of a particular reality, a reality that perhaps had previously been hidden from us. The things that shed light on a situation can be anything from a torch or an insightful article, an encounter with a friend, or the taste of a new food. At the moment, we're all appreciating the impact of COVID-19 coronavirus. It is a dynamic situation. Perhaps we thought it might have been like an ordinary flu. Perhaps we thought it might stay over there. Perhaps we thought, like I did, that it might slowly dilute, and by the time it got to Australia, it would be not so bad. How we were living in half-truths, half-lights. Well, the lights are now coming on, and so living in the light, as far as coronavirus is concerned, is treating it with utmost seriousness. Wash hands, social distancing. It is 1.5 metres everywhere, inside and out, and now particularly inside, the distance is 4 square metres for everyone, for each person. Living in the light, as per coronavirus, increasingly means limiting our movements. The lights are on, we must act. Do I have to add why? Of course not. The why is love. If we love self and neighbours, if we love the vulnerable, our elderly and the young and those with chronic illnesses, then we must act in the light of what we now know. This is clear and is totally appreciated by our Christian tradition. The prophets of old constantly shone a light to help us to see better. In Isaiah chapter 1 verse 17, hear these words: learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, defend the fatherless, and plead for the widow. And most fully, God the Son became a human and lived amongst us, full of grace and truth. He shed light on how we should be living. Jesus is therefore a sort of light, reminding us of God's love and showing us what living in the light of that love looks like. A wonderful example is in his healing of the blind man in John chapter 9. We read only a few verses from the chapter, but the whole chapter is a great read. Please take time to read it later. Jesus and the disciples came across a man in that chapter 9, who had been born blind. And interestingly for us, in the midst of coronavirus, COVID-19, the disciples try and discover the cause of his blindness. They assume it must have been because of someone's sin. They ask Jesus, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus clearly says neither. But his blindness, rather, is an opportunity that the works of God might be made manifest in him. This might seem like a strange answer, but the actions of Jesus make his meaning plain. Immediately Jesus heals the man, and the blind man sees. Jesus is the light of the world. He lives out the compassion to the blind man that is in his capacity. He opens the eyes of the blind, and he shows us how we should live in compassion to others that is within our capacity. The blind man, of course, noticed the amazing capacity of Jesus. Later in the chapter, John records him as saying, or him as having said, never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. Jesus is from God. He is God. As the light of the world, he had a capacity of compassion far more than just opening the eyes of a man born blind. He performed many miracles, spoke amazing heart truths, and ultimately died so that we might know peace with God. He then rose from the dead as Lord of life to share his abundant life with us. What is in our capacity of compassion during this terrible COVID-19 context. It is everything in our power to limit it. Good hygiene, social distance, always but particularly when we are feeling unwell, and simply limiting our activities beyond home to the necessary. It is as we do everything in our power to care for one another. Our capacity of compassion might not be to open the eyes of a man born blind, but we can open our eyes to look out for others, for one another. Might our neighbour have enough to eat? Is our friend okay? We might need to give them a call. It is in our capacity of compassion to write to friends and neighbours an email or a letter. It is within our capacity to pray, within our capacity of compassion to write a poem or a story, to knit a garment, patch a quilt, read a book, mould some clay, paint a picture, plant a seed, or build a whirligig. All these sorts of things we do to share with others. In these various ways, as we live out our capacity of compassion now, then when we do emerge from this crisis, we might be a little bit more like the very best of what it means to be human. The very best of what we saw in Jesus. Indeed, if we now imitate Jesus as much as our limited capacity will allow, out of gratitude to Jesus for his abundant and unbounded capacity of compassion that he showed to us, if we do that now, then when we do emerge from this COVID-19 pandemic, we will all have grown in our living in the light. Amen.